Even though Titanfall 2 was just revived a few months ago and had a huge resurgence, the player numbers are already dropping off, which raises the question of just why did Titanfall 2 never reach the success of Apex Legends? Well, today I have answers to that question from the former lead narrative developer on Titanfall 3, Mohamed Alavi. So earlier this summer, there's a great podcast called Architects of Imagination. It's a game dev podcast hosted by David Johnson, and on this episode, near the end of May in this year, Mohamed Alavi was brought on to talk about a ton of different things. The interview is great. I'll leave the whole video linked in the description below. Not a lot of people saw the podcast, and not a lot of people have been sharing what I am going to say in this video. Excellent insight as to why Titanfall 3 ultimately was pivoted and transformed into Apex Legends, straight from the source. So in the interview, Mohamed Alavi shares that they had begun working on Titanfall 3 after Titanfall 2. They had new tech for it. They had multiple new missions already going, had a first playable that was said to be on par, just as good if not better than what they had before with Titanfall 2. But I'll quote here from Alavi, but I'll make this clear. It was incrementally better. It wasn't revolutionary, and that is the key. We were feeling pretty good about it. Not the same feeling as Titanfall 2, where we were making something revolutionary. Well, at this point, Alavi does share that even though on the single player side, they had put together a lot, they'd done the full pitch, the multiplayer team was really struggling. And I quote, "The multiplayer team was having a hard time trying to fix the multiplayer." Because a lot of people loved the multiplayer. People loved Titanfall 2 multiplayer. But the people who loved Titanfall 2 multiplayer is a very small number of people. And most people play Titanfall 2 multiplayer and think, hey, it's really good, but it's just too much. It's cranked up to 11, and they burn out of it fast. And they're like, that's a great multiplayer, but that's not something I can play continually for a year, 2, or 3. So we were like trying to fix that. We tried to fix that from Titanfall 1 to 2, from Titanfall 2 to 3, and the multiplayer team was just dying. And then PUBG came out, end quote. I thought that's really interesting, by the way. They mentioned that the people who really loved Titanfall 2 multiplayer was a small group, and that while most people who experienced Titanfall 2 multiplayer thought it was really good, felt like it was too much. They burned out, and not the type of game that they could play year after year after year. We're going to talk about that later, because as someone who's loved this game from the start, I adore Titanfall 2. I have always wondered why we're in the same situation. Titanfall 2 has had a lot of shots in the arm the last 5-6 years. We've covered them on the channel. Events where it goes on sale or something happens where the numbers jump, and then it doesn't take long for that population to curve off. It's not as sticky as I would hope it would be, and this is some interesting insight that I've never heard before. So let's hop back in here. PUBG just came out. Alavi goes on to say that many designers at Respawn started playing PUBG, and before you know it, they've built a battle royale map to play on with Titanfall 3 classes. He goes on to share that Friday Night Fights was an internal playtest session at Respawn Entertainment, and they began to start testing out that BR map. Now, the player counts essentially had been dwindling down for these Friday Night Fights, at least according to Alavi, and it was just a few artists and developers, usually about 10 people, testing out things for Titanfall 3. The night they started testing the BR, Mohamed Alavi shared that all 100 people showed up, stayed late until the evening playing it, and it was that way for 2 months. And I quote, "And in the middle of that, we were still testing the other regular modes for Titanfall, attrition and other Titanfall modes against 10 people who would play those, while the other 100 people would off be playing the BR mode." And at the time, I had just become narrative lead designer on Titanfall 3. I had just pitched the story of the whole game. And then when we came back from winter break, yeah, we need to pivot. We need to go and make this game. Alavi ends by saying we can make this game and it's going to be Titanfall 2 plus a little better, or we can go make this game, Apex, which is clearly amazing. As mentioned, the whole interview will be linked down below. Go check it out. But I think this is incredibly revealing. Even though Titanfall 3 was under development and they had those playtests running in unison, the BR mode is what everyone latched onto, and clearly what the studio had felt was going to be that next step, that next revolution. And it leads to the opening question of why Titanfall 2 failed and Apex succeeded. And it is not a simple question to answer. And in my mind, I don't think Titanfall 2 failed at all. We just think of it that way because it didn't have great sales numbers initially, and we never really, as a community here, got the populations that we ultimately really wanted. But this has been one of the most fun games I've experienced in the last 7 years. I adore Titanfall 2 so much. And it's why I want to pitch the question to you, why do you think it failed? Is Titanfall 2 the type of game where it really is just too much? It's not the type of game that a wide audience is interested in playing all the time for a year, 2 years, or 3 years, as Alavi says. And I've really been thinking about this a lot, because we do these videos on the channel every time Titanfall 2 blows up again. And no matter what, we kind of drop back down to where we were, at least outside of the whole DDoSing horrible era, and then going on to North Star and that stuff. In the normal vanilla times, there'd be a spike and it would roll off pretty quickly. And I just wonder, for the people who don't necessarily love Titanfall 2 and see it as the game that they can play long term, why is that? It certainly does make sense. There's a lot going on in the sandbox. You have to be pretty competent at moving, you have to understand the different kits and abilities of the different Titans, and you need to synthesize all of that into a gameplay experience that, serves a wide array of players. Apex absolutely seemed like the right time at the right place. A free-to-play game, stealth launching right during one of the hypest moments in the battle royale genre era, paired with some great support from Respawn, and it's pretty easy to see why it succeeded. I definitely fall into that group of the small number of people who loved Titanfall 2 multiplayer and still do. And as much as I want a Titanfall 3, and don't we all just want it so much, I am curious if you'd run into the exact same situation, at least on the multiplayer side. Because I think a lot of you is spot on. Titanfall 2 was revolutionary. The campaign was phenomenal, the multiplayer was exceptional, and it was just done on day one. They delivered a complete product. It is the high watermark for that old school traditional $60 FPS game, and it's probably going to be the last one of that style we see. And if even internally, you had so much hype testing out that other mode in the internal playtests that week after week for months, the developers would just gravitate right over to the BR style of thing, how could you ignore it? It makes a ton of sense why the studio pivoted. I've really pitched here on the channel the thought that both could exist successfully, that a Titanfall 3 could easily be added into the Respawn launcher or an Apex Legends style menu system where the two communities are united. Apex players have the chance to go and maybe buy the Titanfall 3 campaign or try Titanfall 3 multiplayer if it's ever going to exist. And at the same time, you've had the cross-pollination of a TF3 player wanting to go play Apex. I would be really curious to see what the statistics are for Battle Royale games versus traditional FPS multiplayer to see which one is more sticky than the other. And by the way, I hope the video doesn't come off as a Titanfall 2 versus Apex mentality. I have enjoyed both games. I love Titanfall 2 way more, but I don't have anything against Apex. I've had a lot of fun, hundreds of hours in that game, but nothing compares to the magic of Titanfall 2. And this won't surprise you at all if you've been subbed to the channel for a while, because I tend to like old school arena shooters and games that typically don't have the biggest of audiences, which bittersweet for me, right? So I absolutely want to hear what you think. Is Titanfall 2 too much? Is it the type of game that you just can't play year after year? And if so, why? I'll end by saying this: if you are a Titanfall 2 fan, now is absolutely the time to play. The numbers will continue to roll off and it will form that old school core small community again. So if you want to hop in right now, it is the best time to do so while it's still kind of a little hyper than normal. As always, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed, subscribe, like, do all the YouTube things, and we'll see you again in the next one.